Hey everyone, it's Twisty Fox. And so today, on August 19th, 2026, the WCA just has officially announced that the decision to remove clock is permanent. It is over. So, obviously, as a clock person, this really upsets me. Very sad, when they were saying that they were talking through people and, the decision wasn't finalized yet. I had some hope still, but, this is the final nail in the coffin for clock. And so today, I just want to talk about this and what the WCA is going to be like going forward and just some different thoughts I have around it. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and read the announcement. If you've already read it for yourself, you can go ahead and skip to the timestamp. I'll put it in the description below. This is by Oliver Hexter, and he says, "We would like to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who has taken the time to engage in these discussions. We've carefully reviewed all the emails, forum messages, and petitions, and we appreciate the passion that our community has expressed on this matter. The WCA Board of Directors have taken time to carefully review all of the feedback and reevaluate our original decision. Based on this process, the board has affirmed the decision to remove clock following the 2027 World Championship as previously announced. This decision is final. This decision is driven by the factors supporting our original decision, along with the feedback received since, including online feedback received from volunteer and community members, in-person feedback received from volunteers and community members, meetings with senior volunteers at Rubik's WCA North American Championship 2026 and Rubik's WCA European Championship 2026, detailed feedback provided by team/committee leaders and senior delegates, and a vote by WCA voting members, full delegates, and other senior voters to express their preferred outcome. We appreciate the impact of this decision and know it will not satisfy a portion of our community. However, successive levels of input shown a level of preference for sticking with the board's original decision despite public discourse showing more strong voices in favor of reverting the decision. In particular, WCA voting members preferred the original decision to alternatives during the recent vote. Although this is a difficult change, we continue to believe that it's the right decision to set the WCA up for its best possible future. Approaches to more formally reduce the status of some WCA events were not generally supported during these surveys earlier this year, but following the announcement of clock's derecognition, these tiered approaches were more widely suggested as potential preferable options. The WCA will support an existing cross-functional working group considering the development of a framework that supports changing of these events in line with our strategic plan. No further event changes are planned without a more transparent process and greater consultation. The WCA Board of Directors." So basically, TLDR, yep, we're removing clock. We talk to people, we don't care, we're removing it. The community, we talk to them, we know that more people in the community say that they want clock here, we don't care. That's the TLDR. I read the full announcement, so it doesn't sound like I'm misquoting, but that's really what I'm getting from there. And so I have a few different thoughts on this I just want to talk about. I took some notes here. Let me read off them. So the first thing is that this talk about getting feedback from the community, on one hand, I do appreciate the idea that an organization will publicly say that, hey, this decision isn't final, by the way, you can come talk to us. Like, I can't think of many organizations that would do that, so I think it's a nice gesture. But in the end, it really comes across as like letting people talk to a wall just so they feel better about themselves. Talking to Abdullah Gulab and Dan Smith like I did, I think that made me feel better. But in the end, it did not change anything. And so I think in some sense, I don't know if this is what they're planning all along, if they have this like galaxy brain. It kind of feels like you let people get their anger out and be like, yep, we hear you. Anyway, we're going to keep removing it. I think that makes people feel better than just being like, we're not going to listen to you and we're still going to remove it. If they did listen to people, I wish that they would have, maybe themselves like posted some valid counter arguments they've heard, or, like they have their original lists of arguments. Maybe they could have even come out and publicly said something like, okay, we've listened to you guys and you're right. This, and this point we don't think really hold. We still think these points hold. And, oh, you brought this other really good point. Maybe that's not something that they would do. Obviously they didn't do it. But I think it's something to say, yep, we've heard you, versus actually responding publicly to some of these arguments. Of course, they're not technically owed anyone this, but the thing is, with the WCA being what it is, it feels like a very community-driven organization. And as there's more and more of these nebulous decisions, it's stopping to feel like that. I have something else I'll talk about later with this idea, but that's just one thought I have about this. So another thing that's talked about in the announcement is that there was a vote by the WCA members to express their preferred outcome. Now, I don't have the screenshot anymore, but there was a screenshot that was leaked of the result of these votes. And there's plenty of discussions on this forum about it. Basically, there were 3 options that people could vote for. The options were you could remove clock, you could lower the tier of clock, or keep clock. They let everyone choose 2 out of these 3 options. And the most popular combination of the 2 out of 3 was remove clock and one of the others. I think it was, if not remove clock, then lower the tier of clock. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what it was. Either way, the point is that the option for removing clock was the most popular. However, me and plenty of other people on the forum find this to be a bit problematic, because you basically are splitting the option to keep clock into 2 separate votes. And so if you were to add those 2 votes together, like all the votes for lowering the tier and keeping clock, then that would actually outnumber the people who remove clock. Now, in theory, yes, the remove clock is the option that was voted for the most, but that's a problem in the way that this is set up, where people's choices for lowering clock and keeping clock, whether you want one or the other, I think you would probably be happy with either. Like you're on the side of you want clock versus remove clock. And so I think that's kind of problematic. And there's plenty of discussion on WCA forum by people who've dug into this more than I have, but that's just what I think. So I've also seen some talks on this forum about what if there's a community poll, and there's been people bringing up like, well, this might actually be hard to get a fair set of like how you're going to do community poll, like how are you going to get the whole community to respond, and maybe there's some bias that only the passionate clock people are going to respond to the poll. Point is, every poll that I have seen, and there's even some stats point in this thread, like I think someone said everything that they've seen is 70-30 split. I don't know where they got that number from, but point is, everything that I've seen and everything that's generally out there that's a poll of some sort voting for clock, most people overall, over 50%, vote to keep clock. And they even acknowledge this, which is why I think it's extra problematic that, the community is against this decision, but the board is still wanting to do it. Yeah, and so I have this note here that, 7th most popular event being removed, and a portion will be upset. That's what they said, like, a portion will not be satisfied. I think that is a significant portion that is going to be quite upset, and there's people who's going to be happy, but even if it's not people having a mass exodus from the WCA, I think a good portion of the community is now going to have that in the back of their mind, like, this organization that I'm having fun weekends at, they randomly just, snap clock away. What if they come for my event next? What if they do any number of changes that I don't like? And if we can't revert a big decision about the 7th most popular event, is there any decision that can be reversed? I'm tending to think no, probably nothing could be reversed if clock cannot be reversed. I mean, yeah, sure, 3x3 being removed, that would probably be able to be reversed. But even then, the WC board, I'm obviously using hyperbole, but I think you get my point. And so another thing that he brought up in the announcement is that in the future we'll make it more transparent. Well, I think that alone kind of highlights like, yep, we didn't make this transparent. Oopsie daisy. I think that's very problematic. I mean, I get on them for acknowledging it, but even this announcement, there's a lot of things that are just mentioned and thrown out there that aren't really elaborated on, such as like, we receive feedback, we talk to senior members, but there's not really a whole lot of actual receipts put out there. And obviously, I don't think that they're lying about that, but it is still very much a black box situation of like, we're removing clock. And, I think that for FTO and clock, like if they're planning on doing this, new framework to remove or add events, these could have been perfect trial runs. Try putting clock through the process of getting it removed through whatever framework they have. Let's say it's something like they say it gets removed, but 2/3 of the community has to vote to keep it, and then it gets kept. Like, this is just some random plan I'm throwing out here. And then maybe like clock can be saved through this framework, or maybe they put FTO in, but maybe 80% of people responding have to vote that they actually want FTO, and that like they would be fine if like that meant that clock couldn't appear at World Championship. I'm just making stuff up. It doesn't matter the exact things I'm saying, but like they have some framework. I think these could have been 2 really good trial runs for that. Instead, they're just being removed now. So, they're going to have to do something to track these frameworks. I know I've talked about how when I spoke to Abdullah, that he said that something needs to be done about big blind events in FMC. So my theory would be, and obviously this is just my thoughts, I've not based this upon anywhere, is that once they have this framework, they might be able to, test 5 blind on it. See if like the community is in favor of making 5 blind less popular, 4 blind, FMC. And I mean, if it's a framework, I guess that's not the worst thing in the world, rather than just arbitrarily deciding. It still is kind of concerning to see how much, these events are just changing willy-nilly. But, again, that's something that's to be announced, is not publicly out there yet. Another thing that's brought up in this announcement is that people are only really in favor of tiered events now that the clock is actually being removed. At least that's the way that I read this final paragraph. And the way that I interpret this is that when I heard about this, I kind of thought it was like, for all the WC events that we have, do I think that they're good at being at a big competition? Yeah, I do. As someone who's like grown up seeing all these events there, maybe that's just my bias of like having seen it before, but I think that they do work there. I didn't think that, like clock needs to be at a lower tier, 5 blind, 4 blind, whatever. But when it comes to clock being removed, yeah, sure, I'll take it being a tiered. I'll take it not being a world championship. I'll take it not being a big hump. Why not? And I think that, this is kind of being portrayed as like the community is only using this just so they can have clock consumptions. Well, yeah, because the community, I think for the most part, maybe this is a hot take, I think most people would be fine if clock was not at big competitions. Like, yes, some world-class people might not be able to get like a world championship title anymore, but I think for most people, clock and most of the other events too are just something they want to be able to do at their local competitions and have it globally recognized. I think that's what the appeal is, rather than necessarily knowing that they're going to be able to compete up on the big stage once or twice a year at a huge competition. And in that sense, I think that it's totally fair for the community. I think it actually shows the community is not being super stubborn about this, that they're willing to work around, they're willing to look into compromises, into other things. Well, the WCA does not really seem to be wanting to give any ground on this. So that's pretty much all the things that I have to say about the announcement itself, but just some more general thoughts that I have written down is that I think that we do need more transparency, and obviously this is mentioned here at the end, but them being pretty much is like, for them being like, we want to clock on, I wish that there were more resources and discussions and talking points rather than just the original points that were put out there. When I spoke to Dan and Abdullah, one thing that they kept talking about was the side of WCA growing as an organization and how they kind of were implying that clock, is maybe stunting their growth or like making them kind of seem like a joke to other competing organizations. That's my words, not theirs. But I do think that there was some things that were brought up in the conversation like that I don't really see being talked about online. And, either the case is that they were just talking to me about random stuff that has no relevance on the matter, which that's kind of disrespectful if you have a community member coming up to you and you're just making up lies, or the community member, you're talking to them about real reasons that you're not willing to talk about online and write your name behind. And that's also problematic, that you're having some information that you're not willing to fully put your name behind and be recorded. I asked them if they wanted to be recorded, and Dan Smith did not want that. uh, I don't think it was anything nefarious, but the fact is, it's a lot easier to say something when it's not going to have your name behind it forever and ever written online. And I do wonder about, like, what is the real reason. I might make a video talking into some theories I have in this later. Nothing is official about what I would be talking about in that, but let me know if you want to see that. And I think I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the WCA is heading more and more towards being an organization where there's not as much influence or control from the community. I've mentioned this in a different video, but I don't do competitive chess at all. I can play casually. I don't go to tournaments, but if I were to go to a chess tournament and I started making up rules about how I want a chess to be run, or like whatever, I would not expect those rules to be accepted by the community at all, even if they were somewhat well-backed rules where, like, I had some people maybe online who also like doing these rules. I would not expect an official chess tournament to listen to me. I would expect that to be a tier that's a bit larger, where they already have their standards and practices. But on the other hand, I would expect that if a significant chunk of the Cuban community wants something, that the WCA would listen to it. That's the impression that I have had as my time being a Cuber. But as time goes on, I'm really starting to lose this impression, and I don't think I really would claim that I have that impression anymore, that the WCA wants to listen to the community, wants to help out the community in the ways that they want it. I think that the WCA board members try to see the organization in the way that they personally see best, in a way to serve the community, not necessarily in the way that the community wants, but in the way that they see best. And I think there's some balance you have to do. You can't listen to everything that the community says. If you did that, that would be too chaotic. Nothing would work out. But at the same time, for something that's very large like this, where the community has been very outspoken, I think you could have done a bit more to listen to them and address some of their concerns. So anyways, that's about it for this one. Just a big rant about me talking about my opinions about this. I'm still probably going to do clock at the end of the day. I find this event to be very fun. There's just something that's so unique and interesting about it, and it's not my first time doing an event or something that's not been officially recognized. I've gotten super into Virtual Cube before. I've gotten into 15 Puzzle before, so I've done these weird offshoots, but I guess this is just going to be another one, except this weird offshoot that I thought was officially recognized won't be anymore. Fun fact on the side note, I've even ordered one of the Rubik's branded clocks just to have one again. So I might make a video on that. Stay tuned if you're interested. But yeah, I hope you guys like this. Let me know your thoughts about all this. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about here. I can only talk about so much, but there's definitely a lot of things to talk about with this. So let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.